everyone. Welcome to a new episode of So Here's What Happened, Carolyn Talks. I'm your host, Carolyn Hayes, film critic and journalist, and this is the podcast / YouTube channel where I speak to film creatives about their work in the industry and what inspires them. And this is one of my interviews for the 2023 South by Southwest Film Festival. And today I am joined by writer, director, editor, and musician Dillion Tucker to talk about his narrative feature film, Pure O. Thank you so much, Dillon, for talking to me about this film. I watched this film and I think it's a beautiful film. I think you've made a beautiful story, and not only about, I think it's talking about Pure O, which is a term used to describe obsessive compulsive behavior, especially the pure kind. It's called Pure Obsessive Compulsive Behavior. But I think a beautiful story about relationships, and as you mentioned in the film, vulnerability and courage, and how all those three things are tied into each other. So before we get into the film, I want you to talk a bit about just using your own story to make this feature film, because I think you had to get very vulnerable with yourself to create this story. And I think vulnerable with everyone who was involved in creating it, because they got to know some intimate details about your life and about this disorder that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very vulnerable story. It's talking about, I had late onset OCD and I was going into my 30s. So as I addressed it in the film, that I learned that how difficult late onset is, because you've already sort of cemented your worldview at that point. And so you're sort of dealing with your own hangups, so to speak, about it as you're going through it. But I also knew that that's what it was going to take. It was going to take being really vulnerable to share this experience, because it's just a misunderstood thing that a lot of people within the community don't even fully understand. And so if I wanted to put something like this into the world to really sort of use art as a form of my own advocacy, that I was going to have to be really honest and really, just pull no punches with myself, and to not just share all the good aspects of myself, but to really kind of shine the light in there, and to ultimately not just show mental health, but to show how it affects all the loved ones around you when you're experiencing something like that, and how ultimately the power of social connection is what gets us through a lot of things in life. And so I wanted to do all of that with the film.
And what was it that made you decide to actually make this a film? Because as I say in the intro, you do basically almost everything in this film. You write it, you direct it, you edited it, and you also wrote original songs for it. So what was it that made you decide I'm at the point in my life and at the point in my journey where I can make a film about something that's so vulnerable, and also a topic that still isn't widely understood, because a lot of people have preconceptions about OCD. And I think a lot of that has to do with the media and how media portrays OCD and also mental illness, because I'll get into it a bit, but I think there's things that I knew, like the obsessive compulsive and the intrusive thoughts, but those things aren't actually normally defined or represented as OCD. It's kind of looked at as something separate. So what was it that made you decide this is the film I'm going to make, and I think I'm at the right point in my life to do it?
Yeah, so this is my life that we just addressed, but it's really my life maybe 8 years ago or something like that. So when I was going through everything, I sort of just bullet pointed things out, and I made an outline about kind of what was going on, and I had an idea that I might want to kind of circle back to it at some point. But I knew that I didn't want to write it when I was going through everything, because I wasn't looking for this to be sort of an act of catharsis. And I knew that if I was writing it when I was going through everything, that I wouldn't have been able to have seen through the trees, and I would have been so shrouded by my own emotions about the whole thing and my own bias, that I wanted to wait until I could give sort of a more clear viewpoint of it. But by the same token, I didn't want to wait until I was so far removed from everything that I had forgotten almost everything that had happened. So I wanted to wait until I was in that sweet spot of where I had moved on in my life and I processed everything, and I was in a new place, but I was close enough to where I could access everything and I could touch it, and I could still remember everything, and And it just felt like the time that it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was home, and I had just written something else, and I was sort of just looking at what I was going to write next. And I came across the outline, and I just recognized that there wasn't any charge to it anymore for me. And that I felt like it was the time. It was the time to sort of share my story and to put it down on paper and see what would come of it. And it all came together very quickly after that.
Okay, if you don't mind me asking, are you still in therapy? And the reason I asked this question is because I could imagine not only having to go through the writing process and delving through these painful memories for you, but also just the process of writing. Writing is extremely difficult. Writing a screenplay, a script, is just difficult on a normal basis. But when you're writing a script with the intent to reveal something so personal about your own past, as well as about the people in your life. And while the character of Cooper, who's the main lead, is fictional in that he is based on you, but he's not like an exact representation of who you were, but you would have still had to go through some painful moments, like some traumatic experiences and some traumatic memories. Because the thing about especially for the form of OCD that is expressed in the film, which is relational OCD, where it's like you're having extremely disconcerting and disturbing thoughts about hurting your loved one, particularly the fiance. I imagine, like, just for me watching it, there was moments where I felt close to tears, because the thought of having these thoughts about someone that you deeply love, and then the emotional turmoil that put Cooper through. Like, he doesn't want to have these intrusive thoughts. He doesn't want to hurt this person that he loves so much. But as I was watching, I just kept thinking, like, how was Dillon able to get through this process? I wondered if you were going through therapy during the process of writing, just in a way to just kind of like, I do like mental maintenance.
No, I thought I'm not in therapy, and I wasn't in therapy during the process of making it. I had that thought before I was going into it about like, I was prepared to see what it would bring up, and I was prepared to see. Certainly, obviously, there's a little bit of concern in your head of like, oh, is this going to sort of reignite different things in my life, or is this going to trigger things in some way? But I didn't find that to be the case, and I think part of the way that I protected myself was also, it was twofold. It was something that I thought would just be what would be best for the film in terms of the approach. But I really took it away from myself, and I casted a real life couple to play the leads. And it became less about my story. I actually challenged my actors to try not to really make, my story was already there on the page and in the words and everything, but I wanted them to bring their own, as much of themselves and their own relationship as possible to the project. So once we got into the filming of it, I didn't necessarily feel as though I was sitting there watching myself on screen or anything like that. There was little moments along the way, but I think that's just that's me having the I think just kind of the interpersonal skills to recognize that I was in the right place to make the film at this time. Had I made the film too soon, I think that might have been maybe more of a concern if I was still in that place and I was still too connected to everything that I was going through. That might have been painful, and just luckily, I feel like I had the foresight within myself to recognize that I didn't want to do that, and I didn't want to write it when I was going through everything. So the fact that I waited and I did it when I did, I think really helped a lot. And it wasn't. There's been, like I said, there's been various little moments or something where watching a performance or something, and or in the editing room piecing it together and seeing things where certain things bubble up, but not from a traumatic place, just kind of more from just a bittersweet place, just from a place of remembering everything. But no heroes, no villains, just sort of, this is life, and this is how things happen. And so yeah, I'm actually, maybe it sounds a little strange, but I'm actually able to look back almost with a level of fondness towards this period of my life. just because it's one of those things everybody tells you when you're going through something about, it's like your darkest hour, and everybody's like, oh, this is only going to make you stronger, and this is going to all these things, and you're just listening to that. We all listen to that when it's being said. It's just hollow words. But to be completely genuine about it, I'm to a point now where I can see all of that, and I can see it was such a sea change in my life, and now how much I've changed for it, but how much I've changed for the better because of this experience. And I'm able to recognize the beauty in OCD, and it's not, it's obviously it's horrible and it's debilitating, and it's, but there's such a beauty in it in terms of the gift that it gives you about yourself, in terms of, like in my work, an OCD brain is just OCD thoughts are just normal human thoughts that we all experience. The difference is just that an OCD brain misinterprets them. And so it's not like I talk about in the film, and they talk about in therapy, that it's not about the thoughts. It's about your reaction and your relationship to those thoughts. And so the beauty of it, though, is that when you're writing a script, it aids my work. I wouldn't be the artist that I am, or the writer that I am, or the creative that I am, without having OCD. So when I'm getting into a script and I'm thinking about a million different things, and I'm moving puzzle pieces around, and I'm thinking about plot, and I'm thinking about lines, and I'm putting together a screenplay, it's the same aspects of my brain that goes into all of the OCD themes. It's just that obviously one of them has a very negative connotation and one of them is positive. So I'm able to see the gift of this thing, for better or worse.
It doesn't sound weird to me at all. Like for me, I can share with you, like I've been diagnosed with depression. So I take antidepressants, sorry. And I've also been diagnosed with anxiety, and I take medication for that too. And I've also been diagnosed with seasonal affective disorder, right? So like in winter, like this winter now in Canada, like winter is one of the hardest periods of my life, in that I struggle like just to do everyday things, just being able to write, just getting ready for the day is a struggle for me. Like even sometimes doing interviews can be a struggle, because just start getting myself mentally ready to speak to someone, and like I got to put myself in a place. And also I have multiple sclerosis. So like when you say that, going through what you've gone through is in a way a beautiful experience for you, because it's helped you to see the world differently, and it's made you as a creative look at things differently, and it's giving you a unique perspective. I totally get that, because I think for me, I look at films differently to other people. When I have to write, I look at things from a completely different angle. When I have to do film analysis, I'm able to see things in a way that other people don't. I'm also dyslexic, and I also have cognitive impairment. So when I'm reading stuff, like I don't pick up, I always kind of look at things abstractly. And I used to be embarrassed about it, because I wasn't educated enough about it when I was younger. But now that I'm older, I can see the beauty in my mind, like not to use a cliche, but I believe, like I see now that I have a beautiful mind, I'm able to see that there's nothing wrong with looking at the world in a completely different way, even with my MS, like my MS has taught me to listen to my body better. I'm able to like listen to my body, and also to be, if I need a break, I am okay with saying that I need a break, So I totally get where you're coming from. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm always interested to talk to filmmakers like you, who make films about mental illness or physical disabilities, or just about just the struggles of life, because it helps. I relate in very different ways and from different aspects. And like even watching your film, like I just said, like, I got very emotional, because like I've been where Cooper has been, I've been where you've been, in like the sense of suffering mental illness and feeling like no one understands you, and wanting your brain to work, the way that it can work. Like sometimes like for me being neurodivergent, my brain just doesn't work the way I know it can, and that can be very debilitating, and for people who don't suffer of mental illness in any form, they don't understand, and for Cooper, I think the beautiful thing is that he's working, and like you worked as a addiction counselor. And I just thought like the way that you had to, in a way, make sure that you are there for your clients. You know, you're there for the people that you're helping, but you have to be present enough in yourself to know I can't do this unless I get help from myself too. You know, and there's a lot of people that when we're struggling, we don't acknowledge that we need help, and a lot of it has to do with society making us feel like asking for help means that something's wrong with us. And like, no, like I love the fact that as soon as he noticed something's wrong, Cooper was like, you know what, I need to go find a therapist and I need to do this pronto.
Yeah. I mean, that comes full circle. I mean, that's one thing in an OCD brain is that you feel that anxiety and you push off the floor and you want to take action right away. So it drives you to action, and it does things like, this all goes back from years ago. It's like if we were like, if there was a lion in the tree lines and we were out in the field and back in the day, somebody with an OCD brain is going to survive more than the other person because they're going to be constantly thinking about all the things around them and all the possibilities. So this becomes a form of survival, and there's so many positives within that. So yeah, I don't see it in that way anymore. I do see the beauty in it, and yeah, it's like you spoke to with yours, with everything that you've gone through and that you shared. It's just that everybody's neurodivergent. This, just to destigmatize this thing, it's like I don't know what a normal brain looks like. Everybody has. Hey, what is it? What does a normal brain look like? We all have our things. So, yeah.
Yeah, I always say normal is relative. Like my normal is like no one else is normal. Your normal is like different to everyone else. So like there is no such thing as normal, as we like to say.
Sure.
But for my last question, I want you to talk about casting, because not only the cast that you selected for your main couple to play, Cooper and Emily being a real couple, which I think plays beautifully into the chemistry, but talk about just like working with them for the scenes, because I think one of the most beautiful scenes in the film to me is when they're both at the therapy session and his therapist is lovely. Like your casting for the therapist was spot on. But for
she's amazing. Yeah, Candace Bernay. She's fantastic.
She's amazing. So I think that scene with the three of them, I think, was one of the most beautiful scenes to me, because the love that Emily has for Cooper, where she's like, it's okay, she's like, do this thing that's traumatic for him, and then he breaks down because he's challenging himself to do this thing that he's been so terrified of. So talk about working in that scene, because I think that scene just says so much about who these characters are.
Yeah. I mean, that scene's very powerful. I want to obviously be careful to not give anything away. But yeah, in a general sense, that's one of those things that my actors were fantastic. I mean, just to go back for a second, just in terms of the casting, I was so fortunate that I casted the film myself, and I got all of my first choices. I was so fortunate that everybody said yes to me, and that everybody responded to the material, and everybody believed in me and what I was doing and was willing to come take the journey with me and lend their artistry to what we did. But I mean, that scene in particular, I mean, Daniel and Hope are both just phenomenal actors. I mean, they're both so smart, and they both have such a sense of humanity. We talked so much, and we talked so much about what led them to that moment and where they both were, and again, mixed in as much of their own perspective as possible and sort of their own lives, and everything was just a mixture of what I put on the page and also what them as Hope and Daniel, not as the characters, how they go about things and how do they process things and how to, and so everything became this amalgamation of everything. And then Candace was so amazing she really anchors that scene, I think, because she's neutral. And the main thing as a therapist when you're treating OCD is to remain neutral, right? You don't want to, even when you're doing an exposure or something like that, you want to remain neutral, and you don't want to show emotion one way or the other, because that's how you treat it. The more you're exposed to it from a neutral state, the more your brain starts to not treat it as a threat. So yeah, they were just phenomenal across the board, all three of them. And so her just kind of anchoring the scene as the therapist, and then seeing both of them bring such humanity to it. It was lovely. It made my job easy. But yeah, that was it was an intense day on set, but there was multiple days on that set where I was emotional in the monitor, just watching them perform. Just in individual takes. I mean, they just brought such depth to the roles.
Great. Thank you so much again. Thanks. Beautiful film, and much success to you and to the casting crew. Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you, Carolyn, so much for having me on your podcast.
Yay! Thank you.
Of course.
So everyone, that was another episode of Carolyn Talks for So Here's What Happened podcast, and today I was joined by filmmaker Dillion Tucker to talk about his narrative feature film Pure O, which I think is a beautiful film that everyone should see because it's a film about mental illness. It's a film about people suffering with OCD, and it gives representation, I think, proper representation, true representation of what it is like to suffer with these disabilities, and it's a way for people with these disabilities to not only see themselves represented, but also to be perhaps bring up conversations with their family members, with their friends, their loved ones, to talk about what it is like for them, as well as for people who may not necessarily have anyone in their lives with mental illness or with OCD or other mentally debilitating disabilities, but also just to gain a better understanding of what it is like to have these disabilities and how debilitating and frustrating and energy draining it can be. But it also talks about the path to healing, about seeking therapy and having people around you who understand you and relate to you and empathize with you and have the patience to listen to you. So thank you so much to Dillon and his entire cast and crew and everyone involved with making the film. I just hope that it does really spark some really good conversations and genuine conversations. This is as I said, one of my interviews for the 2023 South by Southwest Film Festival. You can find other interviews that I'll be doing for the festival, including one I did with director Carolina Fiorati and actress Mary Oliveira about their film, My Drywall Cocoon. It's a Brazilian film talking about classes and racism, wealth, how wealthy people can disenfranchise other wealthy people as well as people from outside of the, I guess you could say, upper echelons of society, and it talks about colorism as well. And you can listen to the episode on Acast and butwhythough.net and other episodes of Carolyn Talks. Just look for just look for podcast. So Here's What Happened podcast. You can go on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/@Carolyn_Hinds HINDS to find the video versions of my interviews for Carolyn Talks. You can go to my R3 page, that's AUTHRY.com/Carolyn Hinds to find links to the podcast, the YouTube channel, and all of my published writing. That's interviews, film analysis, film reviews, and profiles and the like. And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. I have a TikTok account now where I post mini vlogs for films that I screen here in Toronto using the hashtag Carolyn Talks and hashtag SHWH, stands for So Here's What Happened. And my handle is @CarrieCNH12, CRIECNH12, that's 1-2. You can also go on Instagram and look for Pure O, which is the official Instagram account for the film, to find out more about Dillon, obsessive compulsive disorder, and about the film. And until the next episode of Carolyn Talks, everyone, stay safe. Bye.